Should Ukraine be able to use Western weapons in Russia? That is the biggest question that is going around right now because, as you can see about what's going on, it is actually hurting Ukraine that they're not able to use those weapons in Russia. To understand this whole story, you have to go back 2 years. It was around that time where the UK, France, Germany, and a couple other countries were kind of like looking at Ukraine saying, we want to help you, but we're worried. Their main concern is that if they were giving weapons to Ukraine and Ukraine strikes Russia, Russia can turn around and say, well, you guys gave them those weapons. Their other concern is if they gave those weapons to Ukraine and Russia invaded further and took those weapons, then they could use those weapons to fire at other countries, including Ukraine. So in the very beginning, when they gave these weapons, they had this small little underlining, which was, we're going to give you these weapons, but you are to never use these weapons to strike Russia. The only time you could strike Russia is if it's in an occupied territory. Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, and even the Black Sea. Those were the only times they could be used, and let's be honest. Since then, Ukraine has used those weapons, such as ATACMS and Storm Shadows on targets in Crimea, taking down a lot of the Russian military. So why not allow Ukraine to strike targets in Russia? What Ukraine had done in the very beginning is that when they found that out, they said, hey guys, we need to come up with new weapons that would allow us to go into Russia that does not break said contract. So what did they do? We've seen them create brand new drones and missiles that would allow them to strike deep into Russia. Neptune missiles that were made for ships on the Black Sea. They got refurbished and then used for that. We saw long-range drones, which are currently terrorizing the Russian oil depots and refineries, which is now knocking out about 15% of Russia's production rate. Yeah, that is big. But when it comes to, say, hitting other military bases, it really is better to use Western weapons. But due to that rule and law, once again, they were not able to do that. But now we're seeing something that it is a great example of where Ukraine should be able to use those weapons. For that, we look on the war map. Here, about a few months ago, Russia started massing up a ton of troops, military equipment, and other things on the border between Belgorod, which is in Russia, and the state of Kharkiv. People get confused. Kharkiv refers to the main city inside the state, and then we're talking about Kharkiv Oblast. It's actually the state itself. Just outside of Belgorod, Russia put together 30,000 troops, launchers for S-300s and other kind of missile and artillery, and a few other military equipment. Their main goal was to try to push through the state of Kharkiv, get to the city, and try to take control of that entire area. Thank goodness for Ukrainians, they've been able to push back those Russians, and really the war map has not updated since then. Russia's kind of at bay at that point. I think they're about 5 kilometers in certain areas, and Ukrainians they're able to push them back mostly because they were able to get a steady chain of different shells in hand to be able to do this and pounce on the Russians. But this comes at a major cost. You see, Russia is losing 8 men for every 1 Ukrainian. So Russia is losing a lot. But what Russia is doing on the Ukrainian side seems to be a lot worse. Since they're unable to get in there, Russia has now staged a lot of launchers for a lot of different missiles on the Russian side, which is only about 10 kilometers from the border. And they're firing those things into the city of Kharkiv, hitting a ton of civilian buildings. Just this past week, they hit that massive, I guess you would call it a Ukrainian Home Depot, 15,000 square foot Home Depot in Ukraine in a way, hit. Russia claimed in the beginning that Ukraine had weapons in it. That wasn't true because Ukraine actually released a bunch of videos showing, hey, look, these are just normal people doing their, shopping, and you guys decide to hit it. Then they said that Ukraine actually had electronic devices that were controlling the missiles so that they wouldn't hit other things, and so due to that warfare caused those missiles to hit those buildings. And I was like, no, that's not true either. You guys purposely used guided bombs, which are guided bombs. You knew the destination, you plugged it in, and it went to where you wanted to go. And we're seeing Russia terrorize so much of Kharkiv that it's at the point to where Ukraine says, look, we need air defense systems because we need to be able to knock down these things. Well, no country is willing to provide those in that area. So if you're unable to provide that, what is the next best thing? Because this is the thinking. If Russia is shooting missiles from Russia and Ukraine can't hit them, Ukraine then needs to intercept them before they come into Kharkiv. And you can't do that without air defense systems. The only other way of preventing this is by destroying those launchers. And Ukraine can't do that with the current systems they have. They need to be able to hit those things and fire into Russia, but the drones they have won't be able to destroy those launchers. So once again, what is the solution? And I have to say, things get a lot worse when you realize what Russia is doing just about 90 kilometers north in Sumy. If they're getting ready to do the same exact thing they're doing in Kharkiv, but in that region. In that region, I think there's about 20,000 troops over there. They've got other equipment, and they're getting ready to once again do the same thing that they did in Kharkiv. So what is the solution? The solution is to allow Ukraine to take down the launchers. Because if you take down the launchers, Russia would have to move them further back, which will not hit certain targets, which will then mean that you won't need as many air defense systems. It is a win-win. And all the United States, the UK, Germany, and France have to say is, yeah, we'll go ahead and let you do that. And the funny thing is, I think we're at that point. Because just yesterday, Macron and Scholz had a massive press release where they kind of talked about a lot of different stuff. They had a press conference, and this is what they said when it comes to firing into Russia.
Ukraine hat völkerrechtlich alle Möglichkeiten für das, was sie tut. Das muss man ausdrücklich sagen. Sie ist angegriffen und darf sich verteidigen. Da finde ich das schon merkwürdig, wenn einige Diskussionen führen, dass sie sich nicht verteidigen dürfte und Maßnahmen, die dazu geeignet sind, nicht ergreifen dürfte. Das hat es von uns aus, von anderen Ländern Europas, von befreundeten Staaten im internationalen Bereich niemals als Anforderung gegeben und wird es auch nicht geben.
On pense qu'on doit leur permettre de neutraliser les sites militaires d'où sont tirés les missiles, et au fond les sites militaires depuis lesquels l'Ukraine est agressée. Mais on ne doit pas permettre de toucher d'autres cibles en Russie, et évidemment des capacités civiles ou d'autres cibles militaires.
So ultimately, they are okay with Ukraine to use their weapons to hit military bases in Russia. Now, obviously, there are things that need to be kind of unwritten, such as that fine print. And you're probably saying, but what about the UK? What about the United States? And things are a little fuzzy because the United States, they're still kind of on that mindset of like, you know, we want Ukraine to get all the weapons they need, and we really don't want them to do that. And that's kind of what Kirby says, which I'll play the clip for you in a second. But then later on, the press secretary kind of says something different, but also around the same lines. So here's what Kirby had to say.
Expressed in this regard, I would tell you that there's no change to our policy at this point. We don't encourage or enable the use of U.S.-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia. I would note that the Ukrainians have, in the past, defeated imminent air attacks, such as some of the ones that have occurred in the last few days on their own since the war began. And we will continue to talk to them nearly every day about what they need.
So we don't encourage Ukraine, but he's not saying we say no, which is, you know, kind of interesting. But when the press secretary comes up and is asked pretty much the same thing, this was her answer.
I mean, we've been very clear. You heard from John Kirby. You've heard from our national security advisor on our position on using that military assistance inside of that's something we want to see, or something we would obviously recommend doing. But we also believe it is important that Ukraine has everything that it needs to defend itself, which is why the national security supplemental that was passed, that was incredibly important for the brave people of Ukraine to continue to defend their democracy. We want to see that continue.
That's something that we would like to see, and that is something that we would recommend. What's interesting is we're seeing unofficial channels saying, yes, you can do this, or we don't recommend it, or we do recommend it, but we don't. They're all still kind of dancing around it. Why? I think they're all ready to say to Ukraine, go right ahead, strike these out. As long as they're only military, whether they're launchers, they're bases, don't go for the oil. As long as they're along those lines that we're okay with, do it. Just go ahead and do it. That way you can neutralize it and stop Russia's advance. It has to be said that every single one of these countries don't want to go deeper into a war with Russia. And that's why they're really tiptoeing around all these little topics and questions, because they don't want to straight up and just go, hey, you know what? Screw it. Russia, we're coming for you. We're going to go ahead and strike you hard. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. No country really wants to be quoted saying that. So that's why countries are either they're saying yes, but not our stuff, or saying go right ahead, but we're not really recommending it. So you really shouldn't. And, other countries should help. And so we have seen other countries say, go right ahead and strike. Like Sweden said, hey, look, we have, X, Y, and Z artillery. You could use those. Or, Latvia or these other countries. They're just like, look, we didn't give you much, but whatever you have of ours, go right ahead. So I think we are finally going to get to the point to where countries will just start saying, yes, go right ahead. Strike in there. We don't care anymore. As long as you're not going after anything that, you shouldn't be, then you should be fine. And I think that we're at a point now as a world that we can trust Ukraine to do the right thing. They've only really attacked military targets. Not once have they attacked a civilian area. Unlike Russia, who attacks civilians every single day. But I want to know what you think about this in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. Do you think Ukraine should be able to strike deep into Russia with these, or just at the border or military objects? I want your opinion in the comment section. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. I'm Joey. I'll see you later.